What happens when major global power reshapes trade rules? Not through cooperation but through unilateral action. In recent years, global trade has been increasingly influenced by protectionist policies, most notably under Donald Trump's America's First agenda. At the core of this approach was the aggressive use of tariffs, such that from a policy perspective, we see that tariffs were meant to protect domestic industries by making imports more expensive. However, when applied at scale, specifically by a dominant economy like that of US, they begin to distort global trade in itself. This leads us to a very broader issue, which is the asymmetry of power in international economic relations. For countries like India, which are deeply integrated into global supply chains but do not possess equivalent bargaining powers, such policy shifts can be disproportionate. Take exports, for example. What we see is that higher US tariffs reduce the price competitiveness of Indian goods, particularly in sectors like textiles, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture. But more importantly, they introduce uncertainty. Now, as a result, what we see happen is that an uncertainty in trade policy directly affects investment decisions, production planning, and long term growth trajectories altogether. As a result, from an economic perspective and an economic standpoint, this disrupts the very principle of comparative advantage, where specifically for countries that specialize based on efficiencies. Instead, trade as a result turns out to be politicized. Where now, if we look at it through the lens or the trail lens, which is the third approach to international law perspective, the issue becomes even more critical, as what perspective comes to the limelight is, as has been argued by the trail scholars, that the global economic system is structurally biased in favor of the developed nations. Even though institutions like the WTO promote rule-based trade, powerful countries often bypass or reshape these rules to particularly suit their interest. Trump's tariff policies can be seen as a perfect example of that. What we see that rather than working within the multilateral framework, the US effectively impose unilateral trade barriers, forcing countries like India to adjust without having equal negotiating leverage. Now, this reflects a deeper problem. Developing countries remain vulnerable not just economically but structurally within the global order altogether. Coming back to India in particular, the impact was not uniform but instead seen in a sector specific manner, such that in textiles, reduced demand from the US affected employment intensive industries. Whereas in pharmaceuticals, we saw that increased costs threatened India's competitive edge in generics altogether. And in agriculture, the dual pressure of falling exports and the rising imports created further instability for farmers altogether. Now, beyond the sectoral impacts that I just talked about, the larger concern is also from a strategic standpoint. India's reliance on a few major export markets make it particularly sensitive to external shocks, such that this is where policy response becomes extremely crucial and extremely important. In recent years, India has attempted to diversify its trade partnerships, engaging more actively with regions like the European Union and the Southeast Asia. At the same time, there has also been a renewed emphasis on domestic capacity building through initiatives, namely like Make in India. From an economic lens, this represents a shift towards economic resilience, because what we see in these contexts is the attempt to remove vulnerability. However, there is also a tension that still lies comprehensively. Greater self reliance can sometimes lead to conflict with global integration altogether. So, the challenge for India is not simply to withdraw from global trade, but to engage with it just more strategically, while reducing vulnerabilities at the same time, in such a way that it balances the both components. So, in conclusion, Trump's trade policies highlight a fundamental issue in the global economic system. The rules alone do not ensure fairness, right? So what we see is that power continues to shape outcomes. It has in the history and it is even now. And for countries like India, the goal therefore is not just about growth. It is about navigating through this very system, though askewed, in a way that balances opportunity with autonomy. Because in today's world, economy policy is no longer just about efficiency in itself. It is more, but it is more and not just. In addition, also about power, structure, and resilience. Global trade thereby may appear rule based, but in reality, it continues to reflect unequal power and unequal consequences, which is why it becomes imperative for India to play a role of balance and look into and adjust accordingly as per the global topography and the global economy altogether.